I've just been having this feeling recently. I've been looking at the world, the climate change that's happening, the increasingly intense political situation, let's say, wondering what's going to happen no matter who wins the presidential race this year. It's 2024. Welcome to another election year. We're in hell. So there's Trump, there's Biden. Who's going to win? We don't know. We are dealing with a lot of circumstances that, to my eye, seem fairly unprecedented. Like, there have not been this many different compounding factors for, like, instability, like, to cause, like, cultural, societal, economic instability. We're definitely reaching an interesting mixture, right? An interesting mixture. And I was talking with my partner about this the other day, and that conversation made me curious about, just because I have this feeling because of what I'm observing, I can't pin it on any one thing. There's all these different things that are happening all at the same time that make me feel I basically need to become a prepper. Follow my second channel for all the prepper conversations that we have. And so I Googled it. I was curious, could we predict like an economic collapse, for example? So I Googled it a little bit. And what I discovered was that some researchers at MIT, which is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, I believe is what that stands for. MIT, very famous college. Researchers there. Good stuff. Very prestigious, right? So back in 1972, and trust me, like, it's relevant, okay? Don't fall off listening to me just because I said it's 1972. So 50 years ago, some researchers created essentially a predictive economic model looking at what's going to happen over the next several decades, basically looking forward into, as far as forward into like the 2100s. And they made this predictive model looking at the risks of a doomsday scenario. So I'm reading this article from The Hill with you first. So they've created a method to determine when the fall of society would take place, essentially. This is talking about widespread economic collapse. So this method has indicated that right around the middle of the 21st century, so like about 2040, there's going to be major economic collapse. And this research has been revisited multiple times. It has been on track each time that it's been looked at. In 2009, I was reading a different article that showed in 2009, some researchers compared the predictive models data against what was actually happening in 2009. And the model was accurate for what was happening at the time, which is kind of surprising considering the housing market collapse was that was in 2008, right? It's pretty surprising that, like, what seems to me like a really sudden economic change that still kept us on track according to this model. Hey, real quick, hit the like button if you're enjoying the content. Hit the subscribe button as well and turn on all notifications. And also take a moment to check out the links in the description for merchandise and Patreon, where you can find exclusive free content. Note that most people with the power to prevent this will be dead by 2040. Yeah, this is a really good point. And it has also been revisited more recently. In 2021, a woman researcher looked at it, and this article talks about some folks who went over it again in 2020. 2008's when all the cool emo music came out too. Coincidence? I think not. Emo music caused the housing collapse. So they used a system dynamics model published by the Club of Rome, which is a Swiss-based global think tank, which includes current and former heads of state, UN bureaucrats, government officials, diplomats, scientists, economists, and business leaders. The scientists at MIT were able to identify the upcoming limits to growth, or LTG, to forecast the potential of, quote, global ecological and economic collapse coming up in the middle of the 21st century. So according to this model, the Earth has been terraformed beyond repair by greenhouse gases, which is going to impact the future access to resources, creates scarcity, heavy metal pollution. Apparently at the time, the study was quite controversial and sparked a lot of debate. But listen, 1972, it is still accurate as recently as 2021, which is just the most recent mention that I've seen of someone revisiting the economic model to compare it against current economic trends. Right, yeah, Gaia Harrington. Okay, so it was revisited in 2020, and I guess her findings were published in 2021. She is the Director, Advisory, Internal Audit, and Enterprise Risk person at a major accounting firm. She updated the model, and in her estimates, the world's population, industrial output, food, and resources will rapidly decline. The 2100s will be comparable to the 1900s, according to the Vice article that posted this originally. Harrington is treating her research as a personal project, and she also concluded that society has just about another decade to change course to avoid collapse by investing in sustainable technologies and equitable human development. So, right, this model, again, has been continuing to remain accurate for 50 plus years. And it's interesting that we've known all these different factors for such a long time. And this research has been revisited. And it's not like this thing was unknown when it happened. People were mad. Folks were upset by it. Yeah, a decade, right? She said that in 2020, and now it's 2024. We don't have time to change things enough to make a big difference on this. So essentially, yeah, we're looking at a possibility that the economy and how much work people are doing and stuff like that, it's going to be more comparable to the 1900s. Capitalism eats planet. It's essentially that the economy grows every year. And I guess this model is basically guessing that sometime between 2030 and 2040, the economy is going to stop growing. And then within 10 years after that, that's going to lead to a greater economic collapse. The US is at least a breadbasket country, so I wouldn't expect food issues to be worse here. So part of the reason why I believe that food issues are going to be a problem here in the US is we're going to have to move all of our we're going to have to move all of our agricultural industry northward. And that's going to be a process. We already have, those big, giant things that just spin around in the field and make those perfect little circles, and they spray water and pesticides out of them. We're going to have to move all this equipment, and we're going to have to cultivate land that is currently uncultivated. We might have to clear land that is currently uncleared. And that's going to be a process where we're going to be having areas that are declining agricultural output and not yet establishing areas that are going to be more habitable, because you'll have to keep moving more and more northward, essentially. I'm not saying that the US is no longer going to be able to produce food. That would be a wild exaggeration, especially because I'm planning on moving to somewhere in the US where I think I will be able to continue growing food despite these changes over the next 50 years. But yeah, the broad scale of moving that much industry from one place to the next, and the fact that this is not going to be done preemptively, that's the other thing. You think, oh yeah, we just move the industry from here to there. Well, no. A bunch of money is first going to be put into trying to badly fix the problem in the local area where it's already happening. And who is going to, are we going to economically incentivize people to move north? Are we going to say, yo, your farm in Texas, you better sell that land and then buy new land in Nebraska? How is this going to work? Who's going to subsidize this? The government, we have already been repeatedly shown, is not preemptive about these things. They don't do things before the bad thing happens. That's what this whole system does. It's reactive. So it's not until you're completely unable to grow food anywhere in Texas that they start establishing more areas to grow food in Minnesota or something. It just is going to be a problem for a bit at the very minimum. Food is already an issue here, not a supply issue, but a distribution issue. Of course, yeah, there's food deserts, huge waste, and companies aren't going to stop doing that just because people are starving. That too. They're not concerned. Don't doom her too much, though. We'll be fine. I resent the idea that, 5 billion people facing global water shortages by the year 2050 and widespread economic collapse by 2040. We will be fine if we make it to where we'll be fine. But I think that if you have the attitude of we'll be fine, don't worry about it, that's a different attitude than we'll be fine because we're working hard to make sure we will be fine. There are already areas in the US where, because of pollution or because of climate change, we're not going to have access to water. Water shortages are already affecting people. There are already climate refugees and climate migrants moving from places that are currently semi-habitable and moving into like, so we're going to have more people in smaller areas as more and more of this area around the center of the planet becomes like inhospitable. So people are going to be moving more and more north. Like, we're going to have to build entire cities or really majorly expand cities to be able to account for the dramatic changes in population density. Like, can you try to imagine how the whole 50 states system of governance is going to work with the electoral college if there's basically no one living in the states south of Kansas? So let me read a little bit more. Let's see. So the new analysis by Harrington goes across 10 key variables, namely population, fertility rates, mortality rates, industrial output, food production, services, non-renewable resources, persistent pollution, human welfare, and ecological footprint. So these particular data closely aligned with two scenarios that were predicted by the MIT model, and the two scenarios show a halt in growth within a decade or so from now in 2020. Both scenarios thus indicate that continuing business as usual, that is, pursuing continuous growth, is not possible. Even when paired with unprecedented technological development and adoption, business as usual, as modeled by LTG, would inevitably lead to declines in industrial capital, agricultural output, and welfare levels within this country. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I think we need to choose degrowth before it chooses us, because it seems like it's going to. Like, and by degrowth, I don't mean you don't get to have internet anymore, or you don't get to have your various luxuries, but that we need to figure out some much smaller scale ways of addressing those needs. Yes, thank you, Mama. I appreciate that. There's a difference between being a doomer and saying, okay, this situation is fucked, I guess I'll lie down and rot, or like give up and die. And then there's being a doomer and saying, okay, this situation is fucked, what do we do next? I don't want you to feel like hopeless about this. It's me telling you, you need to grapple with the reality of what's going to happen within our lifetimes. Look, if you're my age, if you're 30, you are going to live through some crazy shit over the next 20 years. Even if it's not happening where you personally live. Like if you live in Pennsylvania, United States of America, probably you're not going to notice a lot of changes because you're in this green area of like, this is going to remain a beautiful growing area for food and everything. And it's going to stay that way. You know, certain parts of the US, like Michigan, Minnesota, those places are going to gradually become even more temperate as opposed to, you know, Minnesota has some pretty intense winters right now. The winters will get less and less intense, and you'll be able to grow more and different kinds of food because of having more availability to grow throughout the year, right? It's not going to be terrible everywhere, but you are going to witness some big changes. And what I don't want people to do is live in ignorance and not be able to plan for it and get caught off guard if you do end up living in a place where something happens. Like, yeah, we also just recently were looking at how places like water utility companies get targeted by hackers, sometimes presumably like international hackers. Like it's attacks on our infrastructure. So it's not even just climate change at this point. You know, when the water control station gets hacked, you need a well, or you need a water catcher, you need something, you need a distiller, you need to be able to produce water on your own. And yeah, like I don't want to be the one who's bumming everybody out by saying it. At the same time, you got to be realistic. And realistically, crazy things are going to happen. Where I live, people are confused, seeing their, quote, woods for centuries melting away. Huge facepalm for me. Yeah, and like increased wildfires and things like this, it's just going to keep happening more and more. People's homes getting destroyed, businesses getting destroyed. If you predict something 50 years ago and the model is still accurate today, I would say my assumption is that model is going to continue to be accurate for the next 10 years because it's been accurate for 50 years. So there would have to be, something would majorly have to change. And she did say, Gaia Harrington did say that if we made some big changes within the next 10 years, next 6 years now, that we could reverse course on this thing. But none of those changes have happened and none of those changes are going to happen. And it doesn't matter who wins the 2024 election. No one's going to do anything about climate change. Pretending the ship isn't sinking won't save you, and neither will giving up. You got to get a lifeboat and get people onto it. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get the lifeboat, and I'm trying to get some of you people on it. I do worry about my partner that moved back to Indonesia. He talks about how scary climate change has gotten since he was a kid there. Island nations specifically have a catastrophic outlook because of the tsunami problem? Or is it dry there? what the heck can they actually do if they can hack a water center? Well, so of course, a water center is not going to be a high security thing because, we generally have not imagined having that kind of attack on our systems, right? So they haven't prioritized cybersecurity. And is there real damage that can be done to that sort of infrastructure? So water treatment plants treat the water with certain chemicals. And if you were to release like an inappropriate amount of those chemicals, it could poison the water supply, basically. So that is one concern. And they could also just shut down the water supply. And what do you do if you can't get it back on? If it's ransomware, I've seen companies have to just like fold because they can't get the hackers out and they don't want to pay the huge amount of money that it would take to get the hackers out. Rising sea levels are going to make, they'll just make the islands themselves disappear. True. The water is also super contaminated in Indonesia. Bad air quality. It's a tropical jungle climate with heavy monsoons. Okay. Landslides wiping out cities. It's just going to get more and more intense globally. It's like they've been predicting it my entire life, and I am still shocked at the smoke in the air. Like that I live in Kansas. We don't really have wildfires here, but the smoke hazes the air from Colorado, like not irregularly in the summer. I'm looking up and I'm like, why does the sky seem so hazy? And then I go look up the fire and smoke map that I check sometimes, and it's like, yeah, look at that. The smoke map is showing a big layer of smoke over the entire Midwest United States. Like the areas that I'm considering moving to are not going to have less smoke in the air. Like I'm just going to have to deal with there being a smoke season. Eat the bugs. My partner did suggest that we could grow shrimp to eat. And I was like, dang, I had never considered that. That's not a bad idea at all. And therefore we would be eating bugs. Bugs, 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 bugs. Nom, 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 nom. Ooh, so here's some graphs. I love graphs. This is from Harrington, looking at BAU2 and CT, which are, I think, two of the models from the MIT study. Oh, she also wants to clarify that collapse does not mean that humanity will cease to exist, but rather that economic and industrial growth will stop and then decline, which will hurt food production and standards of living. In terms of timing, the BAU2 scenario shows a steep decline to set in around 2040. So we're seeing these different factors. Pollution is increasing exponentially. We have this green line is industrial output, which is going to peak in, like right around 2040, and then dramatically reduce close to the levels that it was around the year 1950 or so. Population is currently growing and is looking like it's going to peak around 2030 actually, and then start to decline pretty dramatically. That's going to be terrifying, dude. Can you fucking imagine? Like, look at this population projection. If this peak right here is right around 8 billion people, and then it's going to drop down to the level that it was in 1920. What was the world population in 1920? In 1927, the world population hit 2 billion. What? Like, look at this graph. Okay, the population is going to peak around 2040 and then decline to the level that it was the level that it was around 1950. What was the world population in 1950? 2.5 billion. So that's crazy. That's crazy. And resources are going to continue to decline. And then this other model, this is comprehensive technology scenario. Economic decline still sets in around this date with a range of possible negative consequences, but this does not need a societal collapse as well. So again, let's look at the yellow line. This yellow line for food actually is a lot more hopeful. Pollution peaks and then goes down. Population remains fairly steady starting in 2040. This one is a different scenario, stabilized world scenario, in which civilization follows a sustainable path and experiences the smallest declines in economic growth based on a combination of technological innovation and widespread investment in public health and education. So these are both kind of, if this one's like the worst case scenario, I think the BAU2, and we are fairly on track for that. This comprehensive technology one is, I think, if we make some changes technologically, economic decline still sets in around this date, but it does not lead to as big of a collapse. If we were to really fix our shit here, if we were to peak industrial output and stop continuing it, stop growing it, our food could continue to rise and then level off. pollution could be reduced, and the population would remain fairly steady and level off. But we're not going to make those changes. It's just not going to occur. Bugs are pretty favorable on the energy pyramid. Yeah, I'll eat some crickets. I keep thinking back to that Kurzgesagt video on the Fermi paradox. If aliens are so likely, where are they? One theory is that societal growth inevitably hits a hurdle and it can't overcome and collapses before it can spread to the stars. Feels like that's coming. Yeah, the idea that, like, the kind of resource management that would be required to be in the stars is like you reach economic collapse or resource collapse before you can get to that point where you have like a spacefaring society or something. Doesn't fixing our shit mean that the executives will have to buy a yacht that's like 30 to 40 feet shorter? Think about the consequences. I know, I'm so sorry. The consequences of what I'm advocating for. Oh no. Yeah, the smoke in the PNW was so bad the past few years. Quit my job because of it. Yeah, I'm super looking forward to having to wear an N95 outdoors. It's gonna be great. What do people do? I don't know. Listen, I was about to go on a whole tangent. What do people do when their cows are outside and need to be able to breathe? Yeah. So basically, you should look at climate projection maps and consider whether you want to move preemptively before things get weird. N95 isn't good enough, just get a P100 respirator. Okay, well, maybe I'll consider it, but P100s are more comfy. Like the world population returning to levels of at 1950. I didn't realize that there were only 2 billion people in 1927. Like it was only in 1920s that we even reached 2 billion people, and now we have 8 billion people. Like I get it, food and medicine became more widely available, but that's still crazy. That's crazy, that level of growth. After, like, human population having been relatively stable prior to that. Like, oh my god, dude. I was like, I don't want to talk about a bunch of depressing trans news. Talks about impending economic collapse. Listen, it's just an excuse for me to talk about my garden. Hi, thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Amanda B., Michelle Frateroli, Michelle Winter, Wellington Marcus, Danielle McDonald, DZXN, Suzanne Maynard, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Jamie Jam, Pasnell Infinity, Nova, Elizabeth Bartell, Sojo, Sarah A., Athiet, Kevin Young, Celeste, Desi Quiche, Liam Hodgson, Mr. Atheist, and Ella V. Nobody.